So, education was as important for women as it was for men. There was no such distinction that, education is only for men. And this Charaka Samhita, which has the oath, the shapat that every doctor has to take after he finishes his education, that oath could have been very well taken from there. Because you see, I mean, anyone who takes a cursory look at both the oaths will see what, because this predates, I mean, Charaka predates.
Bonjour, shalom. Welcome to our conversation with Ms. Sahana Singh, author of Revisiting the Educational Heritage of India, an alumnus of Delhi Technological University. Sahana is an environmental engineer. She has written about water for several years, publishing articles in Reader's Digest, Washington Post, and many other publications. Sahana, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you all for joining us today. We will start with the first question, which is, can you give us a 30 to 40-second elevator pitch of your book?
Okay, let me imagine I'm in the elevator now. Thank you very much. Namaste to everybody who has joined in. My book takes you back to a time when India was the educational capital of the world, and it gives you a panoramic view of the institutions that existed, the Gurukulas, the ashramas, the viharas, the universities, which attracted the top talent from countries around. So it tells you about the remarkable ecosystem of learning in which the entire society supported scholars in any means possible, in every means possible. So it gives you a picture of that. And it describes the knowledge revolution that started from India as a result of all this ecosystem which existed, with all the best students coming and studying and the best professors going from different parts of India to the institutions they wanted to teach in. So all this produced, created a body of knowledge, and literally started a knowledge revolution which spread to the world. So that's my pitch for the book.
And in spreading to the world, what I noticed in your book is it went from India to Persia, what is now Iran, and then to the rest of the world. Is that correct?
So it went, if we go back, we see a lot of interaction between India and Greece as well. So if you see the Western world, it gives all credit to the Greek civilization. But India and Greece were very close. But India has an antiquity perhaps even earlier than the Greeks. And so it doesn't look like, we have borrowed too much from the Greeks. It's more the other way around. And so the Greeks were there very early on. And then, of course, came the Greeks and the Persians, and then the Arabs, right? And then, of course, the Europeans who took it when they invaded the Arabs, they took their books and they took their knowledge. And the same thing was happening on the eastern side and the northern side as well. It was happening in China, and it was happening in Southeast Asia. It was happening in all Japan. So everywhere. I mean, it's a little hard to go back and find out when was the first interaction that happened. It seems to have been forever. We have been sharing our knowledge with the world.
Wonderful. And for the audience who are joining us now, I'll ask a few questions and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. So tell us, what motivated you to write a book about the educational heritage of India?
I would say there is some kind of destiny here, because you see, my grandfather and his father and all the others before them were Sanskrit Vyakaran Acharyas. They were very well known for their knowledge, for the books they wrote. And I grew up listening to stories of their erudition and scholarship. So I had a sense of the heights that India had reached in terms of scholarship. Okay. And so I was aware of that. I was not one of those self-loathing Indians who think that, we were always backward. So I always had this sense, going by what my mother would tell me something about, what my grandfather said about a situation like this and things like that. So I knew the wisdom. Now, the direct motivation would be our move to the US, because when we moved to the US in 2012, and I saw the history textbooks, the world history textbook that my daughter was using, and I was very excited to know, I wanted to learn more about history, what the world thinks about India, and I turned to the pages on India. And I was shocked to find that it was just a very small material, and it only talked about sati and the caste system, low position of women in India, the poverty and things like that, right? But there was no mention of the huge contribution of India to the world, to to Nyaya, Sankhya, Ganita, medicine, nutrition, metallurgy, water management, and what have you, because that is what I had been coming across during my studies. I had been seeing what India had contributed to the world, but there was just no knowledge of it in going by the textbooks that I saw. And so that was the immediate motivation for me to start writing short articles, researching a bit, writing an article, and so on. I kept doing that a bit. And of course, now, thanks to the world of internet, so much of material was available. I could go to libraries, I could buy the papers, download the papers. And of being in the US also gave me access to very good scholars that I could meet and talk to. So then all this happened, and then there was a talk that I did with Dr. Raj Vedam on ancient Indian universities, um, and that is when I said that I think it's time to write something more about this. So I felt that they were for too long our narratives had not been told to the world. The indigenous narratives. We have just been made to believe that all useful knowledge came to the world from the West. So that's how it was just a very organic way in which I started writing articles, and then the articles became a book.
And Sahana ji, as you're speaking, you probably noticed that I was smiling, and I was smiling because most of what you said about your experience in the US in terms of seeing sort of how they view Indian history was
Mhm.
my experience too.
I
But
see.
like most people, I didn't do anything about it. You actually did something about it. So thank you very much for that. But my next question is, when we mention India's educational heritage to most people, they say Takshila or Nalanda. What 4 or 5 things would you like people to take from your book outside of just Takshila and Nalanda?
Well, I was also one of those people that when I did that radio show, I thought I'll only be talking about Takshashila and Nalanda. But what was revealed to me was simply mind boggling. So I came to know that the whole of India was full of places of learning, full of universities. So I hope that after reading my book, people would remember the names of, say, Ujjain University in central India, Vallabi University, Kantalur Shala in Kerala, Sharda Peeth in Kashmir, Mithila, Kanchipuram, so many of them. I hope they will remember those names. They'll learn about Ujjain, which was the place that mathematicians went to study. The best in mathematics, the best in astronomy would go and study in Ujjain. So it was for very brainy people. Then Vallabi had the best university, had the best resources to teach political administration and governance. So a lot of parents sent their children to study that from the Niti Shastra and administration from Vallabi University. So these are some of the things I hope they'll remember. I would also want people to know about the great debating traditions of India, because scholars had to test the strength of their arguments by getting into an open debate where they would be judged by a great master. And in fact, debating was also a way of conducting examinations. Students were seen as ready for the world if they were able to debate on a topic that they had learned, and if they were able to hold an opposing idea and give answers to that, right? So debating traditions, I would want people to know more about it, and after reading my book, go more into it. It was just amazing, because there were actual terms for debating, like you should not shift the goalposts, you cannot obfuscate the arguments. It was a very technical way in which debates were held. It was not just two people debating, so there were minus points for saying things which shifted the goalpost or which was not clear and things like that. uh, and the third thing I would want people to know is about know that temples were also centers of learning. So today I see a lot of misunderstanding about what temples are. Temples were places where when people gave their donations, that money was used for so many things, including education. So while the deities were being worshipped in temples, there would be annexes and other spaces where lectures are being held, classes are being held, homework is being done, all these things, debates. So this is something I hope they will realize, that temples were centers of learning. What else? I would want people to know that the scholars in India were very mobile. despite living in a time when travel was not easy, I hope they will notice how scholars were traveling all over India to get into the institution of their choice, because Kantalur Shala in Kerala had a lot of students coming from northern India. Then in Nalanda, which is in the east of India, there were so many scholars from South India. And they were even traveling to China. When China requested for scholars, some of them were from South India. So you see a lot of mobility. And, like Bhaskaracharya, one of the greatest mathematicians India produced, who taught in Ujjaini, he was from Karnataka. So I want that people should remember this also, that, we tend to think that we are very modern, and, before long back, there was nothing happening in bullock carts. There was one kid who used to ask me, what were you doing when you were young, when there were no computers, no phones? Were you not getting bored? Like, what were you doing? Well, this is what they were doing even long before us, that they were traveling, they were giving entrance examinations, they were choosing the professor that they wanted to study with. So I hope the people will make note of these kind of things from my book.
Yeah, and one of the sort of two of my favorite episodes from your book. One is that the entrance exam was not only rigorous, there were actually coaching centers to prepare students for the entrance exams, even back then.
Yes, I'm sure it must have happened very organically, right? There are only 20% students getting into Nalanda. All the rest are not getting in, and they're desperate. And then obviously somebody would start teaching them, this is the way you get in, and then those centers would come around. So it has been mentioned for Nalanda, but I'm pretty sure it was there for the other centers as well. Not to forget Indonesia, because I was happening to read a book, a travel book on Indonesia when I was traveling to Indonesia. And that's when I was astonished to find that people were coming to Indonesia to first study and get a grounding before they applied for universities in India.
Yeah, and my second favorite episode from your book is about this female student who says, my professor is too busy in research, so I will go to a different university. And I'm thinking that's exactly what many students feel today, that their professors are too busy with research.
Yes, of course, that came from a Sanskrit play. But even then, to have an ancient Sanskrit play talking about characters like this, so it shows you that maybe, we have really got our history wrong.
Right. So the title of your book is quite descriptive. It's not catchy. When I tell people about it, they're like, it's an academic book. So it is not. So can you tell us about the thought process behind sort of coming up with the title?
Well, probably I could just confess that I'm not creative enough, but I maybe, what I gave a title that I would have been attracted by. So for me, it has to be direct. I mean, if there's a book which is titled The Blue Sky, or, something like The Green Pen, I don't relate to such books. So for me, it's like the educational heritage, that, that word I felt was a key word. It is there in my first book as well as my second book. And it actually worked for me, because my first book with that title, it was just by word of mouth. It did so well that even today I can't believe it. Well, I know there are a lot of people who do tell me that the title could have been different, at least for the second book. But I wanted that, now that my name has got associated with these terms, educational heritage, if they're looking for me by name and by these keywords, I want them to find the book. But yeah, that's the thing. I want the title to be telling the readers what is inside. And if they're interested in the topic, they should read it. I don't want to cover it up with something, making it like jazzy, making it, giving a fictional tone to it and things like that. That was I thought. But maybe I should rethink this now that you're telling me this.
No, I just wanted to know sort of, how authors come up with titles, because naming the book is one of the most difficult things, I think.
But by the way, long titles are acceptable, because I say, for example, I wrote in Washington Post. It was an article, and I was astonished. I had given a short title, but they gave a title which was a whole sentence. So then I noticed that long titles are actually pulling people to read as well. There is Medium. If you look at Medium, is a platform where authors write articles. Budding authors. All the titles are long. So, I was thinking, is my husband cheating on me or something, a long thing, and then people, there's a whole sentence. So I thought maybe let me go with this long title. It has worked for me, but maybe I should explore something else in the next book.
We'll come to the next book issue towards the end of this conversation, but let me ask you this. You're an engineer by training. Engineering schools are not known for teaching people how to be good writers. Where did you develop the skill to be a writer?
That's actually a hard question because I can't think of a time when I was not writing. Uh, I mean, I've been writing from the day I took up the pen and wrote the first few letters. I just used to write notes for people, for my father, for my mother. I would write, grew a little older, started writing diaries. So I was writing diaries every single day. So I've always been writing long letters to my uncles and aunts, telling them everything what's happening. So I've always been writing. And because I love to write, I of course read a lot. So it wasn't engineering college wasn't the place where I was expecting any kind of training for writing. It was more to learn the subjects. What can I learn from there? So people. So the thing is that because writing was as natural to me as breathing, right? So it just went alongside whatever else I was doing. So even if I was not an engineer, I was anybody else, I would still be writing something on the side. And I would take something from that profession, of course. So engineering taught me a lot. I mean, it gave me so much of matter. And that's how when I changed over from engineering to writing, the job that I took, which was I worked with a magazine called Asian Water, which is a magazine on water and wastewater, which is read by engineers, technology providers. So I brought in that my own style of writing, which it was read by engineers all over Asia and also those who wanted to know more about Asia. So it was appreciated, the kind of because as you said, engineers are not they're taught to write in a very mechanical, technical way. But deep in the heart, everybody wants to see writing which is easy to read, which connects with their heart. So even in the answers that I wrote in college for questions, I would often get feedback from my professors that they liked the way I explained a concept or something like that. So yeah, so even though there was no help in writing from the engineering college, it was all happening on the side. And I was just using the engineering college to get knowledge, which I would then explain to myself in my own language.
Your answer to this question partially feeds into my next question, which is, tell us about sort of your life from birth to writing your book. What kind of family did you grow up in? What was the environment like? What was the culture like in the family? Where did you go to school? Those sort of things.
Okay. So I was born in Mysuru, Karnataka. So my mother tongue is Kannada, but my father was always posted in different places. So he's an engineer too, and it's in his footsteps that I went and became a civil engineer because I admired him so much. So he was posted in Delhi. So after I was born in Mysore, my mother took me back to Delhi. So we lived in Delhi, Calcutta, mainly, and then these were the two main places. Short stints in other places like Talcher and so on, Talcher in Orissa. So that was the thing, and we were a very close knit family. We talked a lot. I would give a lot of credit to my parents who would share a lot of things about their life with me, how their childhood was, and we all loved reading. So we all had books that we would talk about. Okay, I love this book. This is what I love about the book. This is what I hate about the book. So those kind of discussions were very conducive to expression, self-expression. So that's the kind of and then you asked about my schooling. So I studied in a bunch of schools in Calcutta. I studied in New National High School, Julian Day School, Ganganagar, Calcutta Girls High School, and so on. Delhi, I came to Delhi. That was another experience when I had to say goodbye to my parents and move to Delhi to study in Delhi College of Engineering. And in those days, they didn't have a girls' hostel. So there was I got into that whole fight, demanding a girls' hostel for the girl students and things like that. But anyway, so I moved to engineering college. Then after that, the first job I took was with Hindustan Petroleum, because I also did my master's in environmental. After bachelor's, I did a master's, and I joined the environment department of HPCL, Hindustan Petroleum, which is a refinery. They have their refineries all over India. So I was selected to go to Chembur refinery in Bombay, work there, and that is where I met my future husband. And then we got married, and then we both moved to Delhi. There's also an interesting story about how the whole process by which I met him and married him. That would be a story in itself. moved to Delhi again, and then my husband took up a job in Singapore. And I had just given birth to my daughter, and I wasn't working at that time because I wanted to take care of the baby. And when we moved to Singapore, so that's the time when I actually made a shift to what I like to do, which is writing. So when my daughter was a little older, I saw this job opening with Asian Water magazine, which was again an engineers magazine, which is exactly the all the subjects that I had studied. And it involved writing, analyzing the water markets, the technologies, and things like that. So I joined that magazine, and very quickly I found myself rising in that. I became the editor, and I was being sent to all these places to represent the magazine, to interview the CEOs of companies, to uh, see the water shortages situation and write a thoughtful article about it, things like that. So I was writing only about water issues. I was absolutely passionate about the water and environment situation in the world, and being invited to speak at various conferences, moderate them, and all that. That was my life until I think quite recently. Uh, and then this whole shift happened when we moved to the US from Singapore. When we moved to the US, uh, that's when I got into the history writing. And then I slowly made a break from the magazine. 2019, I quit the magazine. And then now it's all about history. It's writing more, reading more. So that has been the trajectory.
And part of your answer relates to one of the questions we have in the chat box. How did learning technology in engineering sort of help you become an author? I think that happened in Singapore, right? The
Oh
writing
yes,
to
you see,
the.
because it's all about being interested in everything. I mean, if you're curious, if you have a sense of wonder, one of the first things I observed when I went to Singapore was that I could, I called the hotel staff. The first when we stayed, we stayed in the hotel before we got a house, and I'm asking the receptionist, can I? There's no water in the room. Can you send me water? And then he's saying you can drink water from the tap. I said, what? Water from the tap? I mean, in the bathroom tap? So yeah, you can drink water from anywhere. So that's that sense of wonder. How is it that you can drink water from the tap? And then, so that was very much part of my interest to knowing about technology, knowing about the science, knowing about administration. I don't know the topic that I'm not interested in. So that's how knowing about the technologies, and then of course you have your own wiring, right? Where you have your own culture, your civilization, and you're interpreting things from that, from your framework. So I think knowing about technology just increased my knowledge and gave me material to write about and analyze. Otherwise, I've seen a lot of writers who, if they don't know anything about science, or if they haven't done much reading on science and technology, there's a kind of vacuum in their writing. Uh, so it's good, if you connect with more and more topics, any topic. I mean, need not be technology; it can be anything. It's going to help your writing. Whatever topic you get interested in and research more on, it's going to help you with your writing.
Sahana ji, what you said resonates very well with the advice I give to young students, which is read broadly and learn broadly.
Yes,
In this day of hyper specialization,
yes, yes,
I am saddened by how little sort of breadth students have in
yes.
terms of learning. So thank you for that. Thank you for that advice. And also, your bathroom experience with water resonates with mine. I had the same experience when I first moved to the US
Uh-huh,
and stayed in a hotel,
uh-huh.
which is, you can drink water from the bathroom. And I'm like, no way am I drinking from the bathroom. But
Yeah.
of course, that's pretty common. Now, when you told people that you were going to write about India's traditional education system, what reactions did you get from folks around you?
Actually, it was funny. The request to write a book on India's education system came from the people themselves. So it was because I told you I started writing short articles, or some long articles in various whatever medium whatever platforms I could get. And so I wrote a series of articles on India's education system, how India went from being the world's education capital to the leader in illiteracy, something like that. I kept writing articles. And then I got these requests saying that please put all these articles that you have scattered in different places, put them together into a book. And so that's how it was very much demanded by the readers. because the articles that I wrote on education had gone viral. It was being shared across WhatsApp groups and all that. So that's how, it was, there was a demand to put it into a book. That's how I wrote the book. People loved it. The first book was actually, I could say, a little hastily written because I just took those articles and welded them together. But even then, people loved that book because it's so small. You can read it in a flight of 2 hours or 3 hours. So I got a lot of good feedback. It sold thousands of copies. And then there were other people who wrote to me saying that I wish you wrote a more detailed book. I wanted to know more about this. I wanted to know more about that. And so then that's how organically I started writing the second book, collecting material, collecting data from different places. So that's how it went. It was always positive, lot of interest in the topic.
And how long did it take you to write the book? And how did you keep yourself motivated during that process?
So I think it took maybe 8 or 9 months, mainly during the pandemic period. And so that pandemic period was when we couldn't go out, we couldn't do much, we could not fraternize, and that kind of forced me to sit and do, follow a discipline in writing. So that's the time when I did most of the writing. It took about 8 to 9 months, and I think the biggest struggle was to find the reference books that I needed, because I would come across fragments in Google where they're referring to some book which has all this information. And how do I get hold of this book? I would not find it. It's not available, or it's available in some library that you have to go physically because it's not digitized yet. So these were some of the challenges. I tried to get as many books I could from the physical copies from the libraries, but where I could not, then I would have to request people, some. And the funny thing is, a lot of serendipitous things happened while writing the book, which gave me the sign that I meant to write this book. So I would be so exasperated that I'm not getting this book, and I would go to sleep with that feeling. And next day morning, I would have somebody talking about that very book, some friend, this is where you get this book. And I was like, what? This is the book I wanted. So a lot of these kind of things happened. The books would come my way. Or, I would get an insight, which I wouldn't even know that I need to put this in the book. But somewhere, something at that very moment, it would come at the right time, in the right chapter. And I would include that in the book. But if you ask me, what was the main struggle? I think the struggle was not knowing Sanskrit. I mean, not having learned Sanskrit in my childhood. I've always been in schools where, Shakespeare and all that was being taught, but didn't know anything about our own scholars and our own writing. So not knowing Sanskrit was a handicap, but I worked around it. I took short courses. I consulted Sanskrit Pandits to get the real meaning of, the shlokas, because always something would be lost in the English translation. It would always be from the colonial perspective. Did not make sense to me that a rishi would say something like this. A rishi would talk about a woman like this. When I would delve deeper, and I would see that it wasn't intended at all that way. It was different. So Sanskrit was not knowing Sanskrit was a problem. But by the time I got done with the book, I had a working knowledge of Sanskrit. And if you ask me for a major crisis that happened during writing the book, it was when it got infested by, it got corrupted. And just one fine day, I find that I'm not able to type anything on that document, and I'm not, I just didn't know what to do. So I lost quite a bit of the references that I had, like about 80 or 90 reference books that I had listed. And I had to eventually got them from somewhere, another copy, and had to type them all over again. And then I had to again put them all in the order and all. That was that was very frustrating. But again, it was there. The family pitched in, and, my daughter and my husband, they said, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. Okay, this is a little bit of a setback. The deadline gets extended, but you can do it. So those kind of struggles were there. But and then the other struggle was the illustrations. When everything is done, getting the illustrations. How do you illustrate? A lot of people told me, you've given us a lot of facts. Now we want to see an infographic, which tells us all this in one place. To put the infographic together, I thought I just will tell a designer, and that designer, I'll just tell them, please read my book and make an infographic. No, it doesn't work like that. So I had to think about it, come up with a schematic, and then look for designers who could do it. And eventually I found a Ukrainian designer who was quite reasonable in her charges, who did the work for me.
So there's something you said that once again resonated with me. one of my biggest regrets from my school education is also that I did not avail the opportunity to learn Sanskrit.
Hmm.
And I, even when I was reading your book, I was skipping over the Sanskrit shlokas and going directly to the English translation.
Hmm.
And even when I was doing that, the same thought was crossing my mind that I wish I'd learned Sanskrit in middle school when they offered it, but I chose French like most urban middle class people. Yeah.
No, Sanskrit, not knowing Sanskrit is a handicap for anybody, I feel like, especially for Indians, because with each word, there are a range of meanings, and you get all those meanings when you read it in Sanskrit. And but when you write it in English, you can't bring out all those meanings. So you just stick to one main meaning. Sanskrit just opens up frontiers. Just trying to learn Sanskrit grammar, it makes you realize the science behind it. You realize that this is not some random chanting of shlokas that's happening. This is so intelligent. The whole grammar is so intelligent. So it's inspirational. I feel that just learn Sanskrit to get inspired.
Right. So we have another question from Janvi, and the question is, what books have you referred to when you wrote this book? I know you said you referred to a lot of books, but could you maybe talk about one or two main influences?
I think the main book for me was Radha Kumud Mukherjee's book on ancient Indian education. That is, in fact, still the best book. It's a very voluminous book and gives a lot of detail. So ancient Indian education by Dr. Radha Kumud Mukherjee. And surprisingly, I came to know that my grandfather, when he was studying in college, he was his professor, the Dr. Radha Kumud Mukherjee, and that I came to know much later. So that book is fantastic. It tells you so much about Indian education. Then you have, of course, Apte, Altekar. All these are good books. I have my whole the bibliography, right? So I would request whoever has that question, please read my book. Go to the last few pages and go through all those 200 plus citations. You will get all the information.
Now, I'll take a little sort of deviation here. You mentioned that you're from Karnataka and your mother tongue is Kannada, but in reading about you, I learned that your family actually migrated from Uttar Pradesh in the north to settle in Karnataka. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
Like, and was that common back in that day? Like, this was several generations ago.
I feel it was common because there have been a lot of migrations, and it looks like there was a very proactive king in Karnataka called Mayur Varman, who was very keen on making Karnataka an educational hub. Because I can see that during his time, he has invited so many scholars to come from northern India, like Ahit Chhatra in Uttar Pradesh. So that was another journey I made, going to Ahit Chhatra, seeing the place, seeing the ruins there. So what we have in our family history, it is documented that this king called Mayur Varman invited 60 families from Ahitchatra to come and settle in Karnataka. And they were all experts in different fields like Vyakaran, Nyaya. Nyaya is logic, as you know, the science of logic, various others, the performance of yajnas, all these things. And so they were invited with their families to come and settle in Karnataka. And I am one of those from that line of direct descendant of that line. And yes, and the same Mayur Varman has invited at another time, he invited 200 families. So it looks like there has been a lot of migratory movements for the sake of knowledge, apart from other things, of course. There was so much of other migration that happened. Yes, it looks like it was common because the kings who supported learning, knowledge, it was considered very dharmic to set up a college, to support a university. And if you want good teachers there, then you might have to get them from Banaras, you might have to get them from Kashmir, because Kashmir, again, another center of learning. So the kings used to invite them, give them housing, and ask them to teach whatever they knew to the students. So yeah, it was common.
And when I read this, your book, and sort of your family history of this migration as learned people from one part of India to sort of the opposite part of India, it seemed to me that this whole north-south distinction we make, or at least the media likes to make, or some politicians like to make, is so artificial that it's, when you sort of look back, it's all, we have
Absolutely.
common, yeah.
It just doesn't make sense because so many of us have migrated from north to south, south to north. Uh, I mean, imagine somebody from the south also going to the north and then going from there to China, things like that. So yeah, we are all spread. And similarly, genetically also, we are completely mixed up. There is no Aryan Dravidian race or anything. And I wish even the Dravidian movement people would go back and read their history, the ones with claiming Tamil supremacy, and go and see what the Cholas said, how much they loved Sanskrit, and how the same theme is there. The same writings, the same theme is in all the literature, whether it's Tamil or Kannada or Sanskrit, right? The Sanatan Dharma concepts, the Vedic concepts, they're in all the literature. So there's really no north, south, east, west, because of course there are tribal traditions again. There were tribal indigenous tribes, but again they were their belief systems were also absorbed into Sanatan Dharma and vice versa. So the distinctions are really blurred.
So our next question in the chat is from Siddharan DV. I'll ask him to ask his question on camera, if possible. Siddharan ji, do you want to ask your question? I'll read the question then. Can you share a bit more about, then your book mentions about Chinese students and scholars getting copies of our text made and carrying them overland over many months or years? Even I was impressed by sort of how long the journey took and how common it was. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So the thing is that Chinese people, they always viewed India as a land of knowledge. So it seems it was called that there is a connection with moon, the light of the moon, the light of knowledge coming from India. So there was a lot of confusion in China while interpreting the Sanskrit texts, Buddha texts, and they were not able to make sense of it. So because Sanskrit learning was not really advanced over there. So that's the reason why a lot of students were sent to India to come and study. Of course, some of them had challenges even to come because those who were in demand there, the scholars who were in demand in China, the kings were not letting them go. So Xuanzang had to really beg the king, please let me go and stay there and I'll come back. I promise I'll come back after learning whatever I can. So then he was allowed to go. So Xuanzang comes in a long line of people, students who came to study in India. I could at least find 60 to 70 of them. There must be many of them. And they would come to India. They would, with the main intention of, because there was, in those days, there was no photostat machine or anything like that. First of all, they had to understand what was in the text, in the main text. They had to learn the language. And then even if they could not read all the books, they wanted to carry them along with them. They wanted to take them and then sit in the, get work on the translation later. So it was like a competitive activity, which is very interesting. How each scholar, Chinese scholar, saying, "Look, I got 400 texts." Another one saying, "I got 300 texts. I got 500 texts." It's just mind-boggling. They're all chronicling how many texts they have copied and taken them back to India, taken them back to China. So that was a thing. And of course, Xuanzang's is the best known because it is so well documented about how he was, when he was so worried about how am I going to carry all these texts back with me to China? What if I'm not able to make it there? What happens? He was so worried. That's what worried him throughout the last few years of his stay in India. And then we hear about the kings assuring that we will help you in every possible way, right? The king of Assam as well as Harsha, they're all helping him to reach the border. And then from there, he's going with so many pack animals carrying the books, the copies. And then about the shipwrecks, my God, I was astounded to learn about the shipwrecks that happened when he was going across the river, even the Indus River. So there was the boat capsized and he lost a number of texts. He managed to salvage what he could. And once he reached the shore, he said, "I'm not going to move until I get those texts." So he is sending people back to India and saying that you have to make copies of those texts that have gone, they're lost, and you have to come back. I'm waiting here. And he waits and waits. They don't come. So he's forced to move to another place. He waits there. Then he waits another place until he finally gets all what he wanted. And then he moves to China. So, so this shows the reverence they had. They actually had prayers when they set out from to India to get the text, or when they left from India, that please let us reach our destination. They'll play to the deity. With all my manuscripts intact, with all this knowledge intact, let me reach my country safely. So there were special prayers for that.
It's inspiring to read in your book these descriptions of how passionate some of these people were about learning. and especially about learning from India. So my next question is, in the book, you mentioned that the Hippocratic Oath for doctors has been motivated from India. Can you elaborate on this a little?
So you see, there is a lot of evidence that the knowledge of medicine went from India to Greece and then to the Arabic lands. And of course, it went to China, Japan, and Southeastern Asia. But the spread of medical knowledge from India to the Greeks and Arabs has been documented very well by a number of scholars like William Hunter, John Royal, P. Johnston Saint, and many other scholars. So Charaka Samhita was a very important work that was translated into Arabic and Latin. Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita. So we hear of the Khalifa requesting for somebody with knowledge of medicine to come in the court and be in the court of Baghdad, right? They knew that there are these herbs that are growing in India which are so beneficial. They cure people of so many diseases. There was this knowledge always there, and they knew that it's in these books. Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita. So we have evidence of that. And see, Hippocrates has a direct connection. His guru was Democritus. And if you read the works of Democritus, you can see that he came much after Kanada. Kanada, the rishi who wrote Vaisheshika Sutra, the laws of physics, the laws of motion, so many, the matter. Even you can see the rudimentary atomic law, the law of the atomic theory has been postulated by Kanada in a very poetic, in a very beautiful way. But the thing is, Democritus seems to have been highly inspired by Kanada. And Democritus' student was Hippocrates. Democritus is now called the father of medicine, father of science in the Western world. And Hippocrates is called father of medicine. Now you can just trace back where they got it from, and it leads back to India. In fact, you'll find even some of the East India Company people who were posted in India, they are saying that it doesn't look like ancient medicine has come from Greece. They have probably borrowed from India. So I have given all those references. And then there are Greek scholars themselves who are saying that, Pythagoras has gone crazy after he went to India, or even Democritus is said to have come in contact with a lot of Indian scholars. He traveled a lot. Okay. So it's not at all difficult to imagine that this Charaka Samhita, which has the oath, the shapath that every doctor has to take after he finishes his education, that oath could have been very well taken from there. Because you see, I mean, anyone who takes a cursory look at both the oaths will see what, because this predates, Charaka predates. Not just Charaka, Charaka, there might still be a controversy, but Charaka, whatever is in his book, has come from earlier scholars, because he mentions that there were so many doctors before me with their knowledge that I'm taking and I'm putting here. So it's very ancient knowledge. It's not invented by Charaka. And so in the oath, it says that it's a precursor to whatever you see in the Hippocratic oath. So Charaka's oath, the Vaidya has to take the oath that he will be absolutely upright. He will always work towards the patient's well-being. He will not reveal the secrets of the patient to anybody else. I mean, all these things it's a very elaborate shapath that is said. And the Hippocratic oath is actually very small, very condensed. The Sanskrit original is very long. It talks about how as a doctor, I will not take advantage of a female patient who is in my care. I will always be conscious of my duties. I will always try to learn more and more. I will give importance to education. So I should always update myself. Lots of things in the oath which tell you about the code of conduct that doctors had to follow. A Vaidya could be called a Vaidya only after he got this Vidya, this medical Vidya, when he finished it. And in the presence of his teacher, he would say that I'm going to call myself a Vaidya and I will follow these rules.
So Sahana ji, let me come to what I think is a very sort of provocative part of your book. And that is about women going for higher education in India. And in the book, you have a whole chapter on this topic, which I was very, very delighted and I found it very informative to read. Can you tell our audience some important takeaways from this chapter about the tradition of educating women in India?
Yeah, so, education was as important for women as it was for men. There was no such distinction that, education is only for men. And that's why we have Saraswati as the Devi of knowledge, right? And the word, the Vidya itself is female. The word Vidya itself is a female gendered word. So we keep hearing the mention of learned women across the Sanskrit texts. And in the Rig Veda, there are so many verses composed by women. And some of these verses have to be chanted every single day. So imagine we are remembering all those women scholars who wrote those verses. We are supposed to remember them every day. So that is the culture of learning which we had. There was the same ceremonies were followed for girls and boys. The first time they learned how to read and write, the Vidyarambha, it was there. And we also have evidence of Upanayana being performed for women, those women who wanted to seriously pursue Vedic learning and wanted to remain brahmacharinis or brahmavadinis. They were doing it. And then we have so many words in Sanskrit which indicate to you that women, for women teachers, there's a word called upadhyaya, which is different from the wife of a male teacher, which is upadhyayani. So such a term would not have existed if there were not so many women teachers, right? That's why there's a word for them. If there's just one or two, there will be no word for them. And similarly, you find that there are special words for studying a certain subject, right? And there are words for women who are studying that subject. And it's very complex. Women seem to have been not studying just the easy subjects. They were studying Mimamsa, which involves a lot of thinking, a lot of lateral thinking. And so women were doing that. And in the Yajur Veda, we see that girls are being advised to marry men with equal learning as them. Do not marry someone with lower learning than you. You will not be happy. Those kind of things. And in fact, in Atharva Veda, there is a shloka which says that a woman has little chance of finding a good husband unless she studies and becomes a brahmacharini and studies in a proper school, proper university. She has little chance of finding a good husband. So we have all these interesting shlokas. And then the real physical evidence that I found was in Karnataka, where there is a carving from the 10th century. And I was so delighted to see that. So there is a carving showing a woman who is holding a manuscript in her hand. And she doesn't seem to be from some royal family or anything. She's just mentioned as so-and-so, Savinir Madi, daughter of so-and-so. That's it, which shows she's not from the royal family. She's dressed like an ascetic and she's holding a manuscript. And the inscription says that she is learned in many shastras. So this is from the 10th century. So clearly it looks like the villagers in that district, Kolar district, they wanted to honor her and they made a carving of her. Now, also, of course, it can be interpreted as not many women were doing this. And so she was, yes, that's possible. It's not like every single woman wanted to go for higher learning. Even today, it's not like that. So there would have been those people who wanted to do that, wanted to study, and they were okay with not being married or pushing marriage back late so that they can focus on study. There would have been such women. But the majority of women would have wanted to get married, wear nice clothes, focus on looking good and having a good time, having a family. So I think what we must note is that it's not that women were not allowed to study. There were opportunities for them to study, but like today, they have to be ambitious enough to want to do that. And there are some who will be bogged down by barriers. If the mother and father say, no, you cannot, you need to get married. There are some who will fight it and they say, no, I'm going to study, you can't stop me. So there would have been that probably that tussle even in those times. But definitely we can see that women were getting educated. They were writing books. You will find many, there's even a book on gynecology written by a woman, which was translated into Arabic. So we see all that.
And I recall you mentioned in the book that gynecology also originated sort of with the Indian medical system.
Absolutely. I mean, because you see, we were passionate about documenting and systematizing everything. So, one of the things that has happened is that people don't realize when we say Buddhism went to China, Buddhism went to Japan, people think it's just a religion that went there. What they don't understand is so much of mathematics, so much of science, medicine knowledge went along with these Buddhists, because the Buddhists, so from those who were studying Bauddha Dharma and other subjects in Nalanda and other universities, they were studying medicine as well. Most of these Buddhist preachers were also healers, and they had studied Ayurveda. So they would be carrying Ayurveda books along with them. And those books were later, when they went to the monasteries, some of the monasteries got very well known for certain disciplines of medicine. So, for eye treatment, cataract treatment, all this, there were journals, there were books on that, which were carried by the scholars from India. And then those monasteries in China became known for cataract treatment. Another one got known for gynecology. All the women used to go there to get treated for their gynecological problems, because those monks would leave behind a copy of that book for others to use.
Wonderful. We have a question from Atul. Atul, do you want to ask your question on camera?
Yes, sir. So very interesting discussion. I have basically one question. So what's your view about there are some school models like ISKCON Gurukul and Isha schools related to Sadhguru. So like, do you think they are somewhat preserving that knowledge, or like if you idea about in this?
So you see, the biggest challenge now is that we need to preserve the ancient knowledge. At the same time, we have to have this modern knowledge, which is a lot of knowledge has been added on, and we need that as well. So what is the right mix that we need to have? So after I finished writing this book, I got a lot of requests, for Gurukulas. People wanted me to suggest a good Gurukula for their children, because they are so disillusioned with the modern education system. So I've been traveling to a couple of Gurukulas in each trip I go. So I find all of them have something good and something which needs to be worked upon, because you see, it's been centuries of neglect where there's been no state support. There has been no concerted effort. That whole ecosystem where the society was supporting these Gurukulas, all that is gone. And, there's a government sometimes which doesn't want to really care about all these things. So yeah, so all these Gurukulas are now trying. So, and we have to find the right mix of, there have to be those Gurukulas which are only focused on Vedic studies. That is important. There are in the Gurukula that I visited, I found there was a small section of students which were very interested in learning the Vedas. Now, learning the Vedas is full time. You can't do anything else if you're doing that. So they were doing only that. And then the remaining students were studying the state board syllabus and also the Paramparic subjects. So they were doing both. And so they are also struggling to find out the right balance. Like, if they spend the whole day studying Paramparic subjects, and then the evening hours have to be spent in studying physics, chemistry, biology as per the latest syllabus. So these things are happening. I have not investigated ISKCON Gurukul yet to see what they're doing, but I can see that most of them are gravitating towards keeping the modern syllabus intact, but then ensuring that morally and in other ways, character-wise, they're following the Indian ethos, the Sanatana ethos and the ancient Indian ethos.
So I also basically searched a little about it, and I also noticed that I think they're following somewhat similar to CBSE and that kind of syllabus, but their practices, like, you have to stay in that kind of system, you have to wear that kind of dresses. So maybe some element of that, but education wise, I think maybe still it's like maybe 80-90% Western side and still very less.
Yes. But actually, this is already not bad, because they're learning the shlokas. It's helping in character building. They're being told, what are the things that you should value. You should look within you. All the answers lie within you, and, do not be affected by externalities. So those things they're learning along with learning the modern subjects.
So our next question is from Chandra. Chandra, you want to go ahead?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Yeah, and thank you, Sahana ji. It's a very nice, insightful discussion. So my question is simple, that now if we want to, reestablish and mainstream, this kind of education system and the values from an early stage for our children, what can be done and what should be done?
So you see, now the good thing is that in the new education policy that has been talked about in India is reflecting exactly on this, that, we have these amazing Indian knowledge systems that we need to integrate with our modern subjects and the modern education. So what needs to be done is now that we need we need many, many new textbooks. We need a totally new protocol, right? In order to integrate all that knowledge into whatever they are studying. So so that's what actually, it's a lot of logistics involved in this, and we need a lot of teachers, good teachers who are trained. The problem now is multifold. You need to have good textbooks, you need to have good teachers, and you need to now also integrate everything with whatever is existing, because you cannot now the easiest thing is just close down everything and start afresh, but we can't do that. We need to keep it going, and then we need to keep bringing in new changes, and then slowly making expanding those changes, also raising money for that. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I am seeing that a lot of people are working on it in the new education policy. So I think we will see it being implemented in phases. So early education, yes, you can learn in the sing-song way. You can learn shlokas, instead of learning Baba, Black Sheep, have you any wool and all that, which doesn't make any sense. You will learn some beautiful, meaningful shlokas as when you're young. Then you learn you learn language, you learn grammar. And if you learn Sanskrit at a young age, then you're already going to be a very thinking person. You will start looking at things scientifically, because you'll be forced to look at the root of the words. How did this word come in a logical way? And I would love to see Indian logic being taught, the Nyaya Shastra, and there are many other subjects, the Indian Ganita, the Indian astronomy, because these will actually clear the clutter in your mind. There is for example, today we don't know why there are 60 minutes in an hour. Why are there 60 seconds in a minute? We just take it for granted and we just learn. We use it in maths and astronomy. But if you integrate indigenous Indic knowledge systems into it, then you will start looking at why they are having this 60 seconds in a minute. It'll be explained to you. You will see it. And then you will realize that how you start feeling motivated to learn more and more. So I think what we have to do is to introduce a mix of new subjects, which are actually teaching the old ancient knowledge, but in a very interesting way. We also need to learn to introduce games, because in ancient India, there were games that were used to teach. So we need to bring back those games. We need to bring back stories. We need to bring back songs. And then slowly, we'll see. It'll take a long time, but I think we can, it has already started in these gurukulas that I visited. It needs to be given more impetus.
And in your book, you have a whole chapter on the use of games in ancient Indian education. So that was very surprising and fun for me to read. But let me take Chandra's question in a different direction, slightly different direction. We can wait for the government and the schools to change, but what can we do in our own families to bring back some of those positive learnings at the same time as we want the kids to learn whatever they need to learn today? But what can we do in the family itself? Anything?
Yeah, so I would talk from my own experience. So as I have been connecting with our history, reading the books, okay, so I've been discussing that with so we first of all have to read as much as we can, right? So Ramayana, Mahabharata, it is just, these epics are just so beautiful. They can be the entry points for so many discussions, discussions about right and wrong, dharma, what is not dharma, those kind of things. So we have to read more of these books and discuss them. And we have to also explain to our children what they mean. Like many of them, I see the parents would just take them to festivals, make them wear a certain dress, just go through the motions, but they don't inspire them. They don't tell them why we are doing this. This is so meaningful. So when we are doing a puja, we are getting certain kind of flowers, certain kind of special leaves for each deity. So each deity requires a certain set of flowers and what they call superfoods today. So if you read it in the media, you say, oh, superfood, this is good for health, this, that. But look at the superfoods we are offering in the puja. We bring those special grains, we bring them and we offer them. And then we take it out. We are supposed to make some food out of it and eat it. So as we understand it ourselves, the meaning of all these customs, and then we participate in them, explain it to our children, and then we go to festivals and go to temples and show it to them. Look at the way they're doing the aarti. Do you understand why they're doing it this way? What are they giving here? What are they praying for here? So I think for me, it was like getting my daughter involved and explaining it to her and having a discussion with her. It was never about, okay, this is the way you do it and you just have to do it. Or maybe I don't know anything. There are those parents, I don't know, this is the way it's always been done, so just do it. So that's not the way. We have to make it interesting and inspiring, and we have to learn ourselves. We have to read. We can't escape that. There's no short charging this. We have to read books. We have to give respect to the people who can teach us. Like go back and ask, connect with our uncles and aunts and elders in the family and ask them why we do certain things in a certain way. What does it mean? And then slowly the beauty of our cultural practices will come out. We also need to become cool. I feel that a lot of parents, Indian parents, they're not cool enough. And so their children don't see them as role models because they'll say, you don't know anything, don't tell me about this. You don't know what's happening in my college. This is what we are talking about. And you're talking about some archaic thing. So these are some of the disconnects that I'm seeing. I've been trying to bridge that by talking as much as possible. But yeah, so you have to be cool, interesting parents who are able to, who understands the civilization and also is able to explain it in that way, in an interesting way, in the form of games and in an inspirational way. So if you don't inspire children, they're not going to do anything. They're going to stop it the moment you're not there.
Sahana ji, I feel like I could keep talking to you and learning from you for the next 30 minutes or next 2 hours. But in the interest of time, let me ask you sort of the ending questions. And let me make it rapid fire so that we don't go past sort of our promised time for the audience. So the next 3 questions are rapid fire, okay? What senior writers inspired you?
Okay, so for me, it's very easy. I've also mentioned it in my book, Dr. David Frawley. His books were very inspirational. His book, Arise Arjuna, especially, it just kindled the imagination in me. Then the others who inspired me were Dr. Subhash Kak, Dr. N.S. Rajaram, Dr. Meenakshi Jain. Today, she's writing amazing books even today. Dharampal is a reference book, or his books were reference books for me, but even today they are worth reading. Then there is Dr. Nagaswamy. His books on Tamil Nadu's history is very, very interesting. Dr. R. Vaidyanathan, then Guru Murthy ji, the ones who explain Indian economic systems, Kanaga Sabapati. These are some of the senior writers that I've looked up to.
Wonderful. Next question. What books are you reading these days?
So I am reading a book called The Introduction to Indian Knowledge Systems by Professor Mahadevan, and there are 2 other co-authors. So I've finished reading it once, but I'm rereading it because it's very, very heavy, there's a lot of material. So that's one book, Dr. Mahadevan's book. Then I've also got this book by Dr. D.V. Sridharan. He's the one who asked me the question today, a good friend, and his book called Good News India is something that I keep going back to, and I have it on my table here, wanting to go back. It talks about some of the wonderful innovations made by Indians and the stories the investigative stories he has done with them. Then I'm also reading a book by Sabarish, which is called A Brief History of Science in India. That is one. Then I have The Maharanas by Omendra Ratnu, which is lined up to read after I finish the others.
Wonderful. And here's my copy of Good News India.
Oh, you have that? Great.
Yep,
wonderful.
Which I'm reading here in...
Oh, what a coincidence.
In Alabama. So
Wow.
Dr. Sridharan, thank you for this book. I find it very useful. Last question, Sahanaji. What is the next book you're working on? You mentioned you're thinking about the next book. What is it about?
So I'm hoping that it's going to be something in the line with what I've already written. It's probably going to be about the Gurukulas of India. So because I've been traveling to all these Gurukulas, so that is one possibility. I have not started writing anything yet, but all those short little those trips that I've made to Gurukulas, I'm writing articles on them because that's how I write. I write articles which eventually become books. Gurukulas. Then I'm also thinking of the caste system, of whether I can add to the huge number of books already written on the caste system and demystify it and explain what it is in terms of Varna, Jati, Kula. There's already a very good book written by a friend of mine, Sudha Mohan, and I want to take something from that and also look at other things. And I'm also thinking of, the indigenous people of America and comparing them with Indians, with the Hindus and Indians and their practices to see there is something there, because I see a lot of commonalities. And so I want to read up on that and see if I can write something on that.
So that sounds almost like next 5 years worth of books that you're going to be writing.
Right.
Yeah. So on that note, let me thank you very much for taking the time to talk to our audience. Is there something else you would like to say to them? I know you said, please read. I know you said, definitely read books. Is there any other message you have for them as we come to the end of this talk?
No, I would just like to say that, we have been colonized for so long that we probably are not even aware of the ways in which we are colonized. So I would just make a request that, try every means to cast off those colonial, those lenses that you have been given, I would call it the Christian missionary, colonial, Marxist lenses that a lot of us have and we don't know. And B, try to find out your own indigenous history or family history, and look at the world with your own eyes. That is just one parting thought that I have.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And it was a delight to start my Sunday talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I enjoyed too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.